Through its research and convenings, the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy seeks to make philanthropy more impactful today and to create a smarter, stronger sector for tomorrow.
I want to start the program now because we have a lot to cover on impact investing and change in philanthropy, as Ken so rightly encouraged us and inspired us earlier. I do want to let you know that we're going to save about 15 minutes at least for questions after the exchange between Jean and Jeff. So you should see small 3x5 cards on the tables and some pens. So if you have questions, things come to mind as the conversation unfolds, please write them down. And then Farah and Bree, who are at the back of the room, get their attention and they'll collect them and bring them up, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the allotted time. I'm really happy that Jean is here today. She's actively engaged philanthropist, investor, and a pioneer in the world of interactive technologies. Actually a high-tech person that's on the East Coast, not the West Coast. Her career in the private sector spanned nearly 2 decades before she and her husband, Steve Case, created the Case Foundation in 1997. And prior to co-founding the Case Foundation, she spent a career in the technology industry as an executive, especially most recent, her last stint was as a senior executive at AOL. Jean and Steve joined the Giving Pledge that our friends Bill Gates and Warren Buffett started, and they have publicly reaffirmed their commitment to give away the majority of their wealth to fund charitable causes. The Case Foundation is recognized. The Case Foundation is recognized for its leadership in leveraging new technologies and applying innovative approaches to increase giving, catalyze civic and business participation, and promote innovation, collaboration, and leadership in the nonprofit sector. She is a passionate believer in all things digital and the amazing potential of technology to change the world for the better. We are delighted to have Jean with us today as our distinguished speaker. She's going to be engaged in a conversation with Jeff Hoffman, who is a center board member. Jeff is a principal in Jeffrey Hoffman and Associates, has a long and dedicated career to issues of civic engagement, volunteerism, and corporate social responsibility. And they actually have worked together in many ways, especially as board members of the Points of Light Foundation. So we are excited that they're here. And while they come up to the stage, I want to play a short video clip for you. This is a campaign that caught my attention a couple of years ago that the Case Foundation launched as part of its 15th anniversary in June 2012. It's basically talking about how to be fearless. So could we roll the clip while Jean and Jeff sort of come up?
Thanks.
If you added up all the times you failed, all the times you came up short, would you try again? What if failure wasn't a limitation? What if taking risks was your status quo? What kind of world would you imagine? When global challenges seem overwhelming, we need to create unlikely partnerships, experiment with new thinking, and set audacious goals. To build a better world, to make a real difference, we have to take bigger risks, make bigger bets. And if we fail, and fail again, we have to get right back up, stronger than we were before. To live in a world worth living in, we have to let challenge inspire us. We have to take risks, be bold, and let urgency conquer fear. We have to be fearless.
Thanks, Jim, and Jean, an incredible video. First of all, I have to thank you for putting Walt and Mickey in there. I loved that when I first saw it.
Our nod to LA here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to point out some of the words in that. I mean, it's a 1-minute video, but there are such powerful words. I mean, be fearless, which we're going to talk about. But what if failure is not a limitation? How many of us think that? I mean, that's an incredible concept that we're going to explore today. Set audacious goals. Take bigger risks. Make bigger bets. Be bold. Let urgency conquer fear. And, I have to ask you, I mean, that urgency and conquering and being fearless, how did you get into this? How did you decide that you were going to dedicate your life to philanthropy?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to get into that, but let me say, this is a great audience. I've had the opportunity to meet many of you in the last hour, and I told Ken, gosh, I didn't know he would be the warm-up act for our Be Fearless talk and some of the things that he put forward. And Shirley, we haven't met, but I'm honored to be here for general purposes. But when someone comes on our birthday, like, wow, happy birthday, okay? So what really drew me to philanthropy, I think, the roots of it, I actually was an early recipient of philanthropy, people's time and people's money. I was raised by a single mom who raised 4 kids alone. And because of that, we had some challenges. And we had a wonderful, beautiful community come around us, lift us up, and help support us, and really create paths to opportunity for me. I was on full scholarship at a private school, which led me to an early mentor who was first a judge, then a mayor, became congressman. And so as I came out of school, I went to work for him in his congressional office. And that was sort of the beginning of really creating a terrific path and opportunity for me. And simply none of that would have happened, I'm quite certain, unless there were people like everyone here in this room basically saying, okay, I'll spend my time, my precious money, trying to create an opportunity for someone else. And so I really was a recipient of it. But this idea of opportunity for all, I feel like I've been very privileged in my life because, as I said, I started out really on the other side where there weren't clear paths to opportunity. And as I sit here today, I'm embarrassed by the rich opportunities we have every day, to engage in things, to, learn, to meet people, etc. And so I think we're really super passionate about saying, okay, we've been fortunate enough to land on this side of life, and there's nothing more we want to do than make sure that we can ensure opportunity for all through the resources that we have.
Well, you got to that point through philanthropy, through having a great mentor, a good education. You had a very successful career in a little company called AOL, who, the forefront of the internet movement. But then you came back to that philanthropy.
I did.
What was your pivot there?
I think we're going to talk about a lot of things today, and the reason that you saw the Be Fearless video is it was really sort of a study that we did on transformative breakthroughs, whether they be causes, movements, whatever. And Jeff highlighted some of the principles, but we'll go through them. But even at AOL, the term impact investing wasn't known yet. But we were very much a mission-driven organization at the very beginning. In fact, many of us felt at the time AOL could have been a nonprofit because what we were out to do was democratize access to ideas, information, and communication to really level the playing field of opportunity, if you will. And so I think we had as a spirit in the company, the DNA of the company was very much mission-driven. In my role as an executive there, it was under my responsibility to sort of stand up the AOL Foundation. And that was my toe in the water, really, into sort of the official world of philanthropy. But I think we always knew that certainly when I would retire, we would turn and make it more of a full-time thing, which is what we did in 1997. And we really spent a lot of time, I did, just trying to get my sea legs. I mean, Fred and I were talking this morning, and if you talk to a lot of folks who, come out of, say, an intense business career, and then they say, okay, I'm going to focus on a nonprofit or a philanthropy, you know, there's a little bit of adjustment that happens. I felt like I didn't walk right or talk right, or, you know, I didn't have the language, and I really did feel like a fish out of water for some time. But there were wonderful people around me, and sort of the, you know, at the end of the day, what it took me about maybe 3 or 5 years to learn was the very same person, the very same things that had led to success in business would likely be the way to have success in philanthropy as well. But it wasn't so obvious to me when we got started. So the Be Fearless campaign that you saw the video of, as we turned 15, we really used it as a reflection point. And we said, you know, what have we learned and what are we seeing around the world? What do we see as we look back? What do we see as we look around in our own work and the work of partners? Pretty much everything the Case Foundation does, we do collaboratively. Don't lay claim to anything on our own, including this Be Fearless work. And so we hired a firm, and we basically said, you know, as we come together as a team and we think about the daunting challenges in our communities, in our nation, and around the world, gosh, it's not a very pretty story. A lot of the problems have been with us for a millennium, okay? Some for just hundreds of years. And yet in many places, there have been a lot of money and a lot of organizations trying to sort of chase solutions, if you will. But if you flip the coin, there really are some bright spots where there's been transformational breakthrough. So we hired a firm to say, all right, we want to go to school on that. What's behind the business when it works? And so from that was born 5 principles that were covered somewhat in the video you just saw. Quickly, they are make big bets and make history. Experiment early and often. Take risks is really that. And I want to pause on that one specifically because, again, coming out of business and into philanthropy in the nonprofit world, I was quite stunned to realize I thought philanthropy should be the first risk capital, right? Because it's people's own money. It's not government money. It's not a corporate driving it that worries about, you know, shouldn't philanthropy be out there on the front lines demonstrating, experiencing, trying to find solutions in our communities? But in fact, we had not seen a lot of that in philanthropy. And not just us. I'm saying if you do a study on it, it's quite clear. And that makes sense to me. I often say, if I'm taking my own $100, I'm going to take a risk with my $100, right? I'm risk tolerant with my own money, and it's my decision. But if you, Fred, give me your $100, I'm going to go into protection mode. I'm going to go into risk aversion mode because I want to protect your reputation, and you've given me this big responsibility. But in fact, every foundation, whether 100 years old or 10 years old, was most likely started by an entrepreneur who broke through and found success because they took risks. So the risk-taking piece, and we want to call even the biggest, oldest foundations, including young ones like ourselves, we really want to call them to acknowledge that to find new solutions, and we desperately need new solutions to old problems, we're going to have to take risks. We're going to have to experiment early and often. And we've really worked with the sector to say, can you find some room in the things you go out and try? Is that 1%? Is that 5%? Is that one thing you'll do this year? To take some risks and experiment. Now, the whole point here is that we need innovation in this space, right? If you're going to innovate and you're going to take risks, there's a chance you'll fail. And, you know, we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs. And every great company you know, and every great sort of entrepreneur you've heard of or corporate leader, guess what? Their path is riddled with failures. That's how they found, you know, an innovative approach. It's just not reality to think that you can innovate without risking failure. And so it's an interesting conversation we have. As a foundation, I've written about our failures, and we do things called Failed Fests. Let's say we're at a 2-day conference here together. And we invite people to stand up and tell their stories, not because we're celebrating failure, but because when we all start acknowledging, guess what? 100% of the time, we don't always get it right. Mm-hmm. It starts to make folks a little more comfortable, and they'll come out from the shadows and try some things if they feel like it's okay sometimes to fail. Now, I will say we found it always helpful to add a little alcohol to the mix, wine or beer. People get a little more honest on the old Fail Fest when we do that. But really, we've been thrilled at various philanthropy gatherings and nonprofit gatherings to hold those dialogues.
So going back to the 5.
Yes.
I think
big bets, experiment early and often. We say fail fast, fail forward, make failure matter. That's the 3rd. Reach beyond your bubble. And that is something that as I moved around the room out there and met some folks today, I'm super impressed with the collaboration that I'm seeing in this crowd. And I must tell you, it's quite rare. You know, some folks were asking or saying that LA is seen as different in philanthropy or whatever. I haven't really heard that at all. But what I will leave here saying is LA is doing some really awesome things on collaboration. Jim, in bringing together the biggest foundations to talk to each other. Well, you know, most places you'd go, duh, but actually, that's radical. Okay, we're a sector that is not known first for its collaboration. But the reach beyond your bubble is not just collaboration within your own space, but making sure you have very diverse perspectives. And again, Ken touched on some of this in his remarks. It's a broad set of perspectives. And most importantly, and this one really blew my mind when I came into philanthropy, it's too often the case that the very people you're trying to serve, you don't have their voice at the table. And the bottom line is, if you don't have someone sitting at your table that looks different, sounds different, brings a different perspective, it's going to be harder, really, to find innovative new thinking to approach the challenges. And if you don't have the voice you're trying to serve somewhere in the mix, you know, good luck getting it right. It doesn't really work that way. And then the last one is let urgency conquer fear. And I followed someone at a conference last year, and he was from the business sector, and he said, you know, I always know when I'm in the philanthropy world because people talk a little slower and they walk a little slower. And, you know, that's obviously painting a brush that isn't fair. But the bottom line is we do need to embrace urgency. And, you know, there are urgent needs and urgent challenges. And I think when you walk into many organizations, you know what that feels like. We're on a roll here. We've got a big mission, and let's get to it. But the other thing about that is if you recognize that you're on sort of an urgent mission, it also helps you get a little more comfortable with taking risks because urgency does conquer fear. I often think of Rosa Parks, right? What really emboldened that woman to get on a bus? Really, and change history for all time, certainly in our nation. And I think it was urgency conquering fear. She knew something had to change, and she overcame fear to get on that bus. Now, that's a personal action by one person, but what organizationally might we find the willingness to do? Because, you know, the needs are just too urgent. Martin Luther King called it the fierce urgency of now. And I think we're living in that time as we watch Baltimore and we watch communities, you know, explode and needs just all over the place in our communities.
So, well, first of all, how many of you want to go to the Fail Fest?
All right.
I don't know, it sounds like a great time to me, and I've got a long list of things to talk about. But seriously, I mean, it's, you know, the principles, I think, are so solid, and they make a lot of sense. And this is a campaign. How are you pushing it out?
Sure.
Who is it going to, and are you seeing a result from it?
Thank you for that. So Jeff mentioned we launched it a few years ago. And at first, we sort of just put it out there, and then we began a series of dialogues and presentations, more or less to teach it as a concept, not because it's our thinking, but because there was good study around these principles are behind where we see breakthroughs and transformation. So I would say at least the first year, if not the first year and a half, was really just going out and talking to rooms like this and spending time with people and kind of trying to spread the word about what had been uncovered here, basically, so that we'd have a little bit of a roadmap. We've switched, and if you go to casefoundation.org, we now have a series of case studies of organizations that have embraced this and what they're finding as a result. We're going to put more and more data out there, but now we also have a little bit of a curriculum online, things we'll walk you through. When I teach students, I teach Be Fearless, and I specifically have them, and I do this sometimes with boards or executive management teams, try to help them understand where are they in risk tolerance, right? Because the DNA of some organizations is, you know, total stiff arm, like we are just not willing to, you know, try big experiments. But I say, could you maybe take 1% of your budget and make it, you know, experimental, R&D, try something new? Could you take one project? So there are ways that we try to bring people from, I'm really afraid of this and I don't want to, you know, risk looking like a fool, okay, or ruining my organization, to, okay, but toe-in-the-water approaches. And really, we've really seen some remarkable change in organizations where it might have started with, we'll try one thing. And guess what? Everybody got really jazzed, and now we see more and more and more activity. We'll probably wait till the 20th before we really have what we would consider, you know, a full view of where has the impact been. But we're measuring it, we're producing case studies. We have a lot of data on the Case Foundation site around what this is all about and what we've seen.
So let's transition from Be Fearless into another area you're really focusing on right now, and that's impact investing.
Yeah.
And we are all hearing a lot about impact investing, but I don't know about you, but we could probably go around the room and come up with 10 different definitions of what that means.
Right.
What's your definition?
So my favorite story to tell on this is going to this confusion issue. Mark Andreessen is a dear friend. We actually had acquired Netscape in our old AOL days, and Mark was too young to rent a car back then. So we had to kind of take him under our wing. And we were pretty young too, but he was really young. But anyway, when Mark first heard about impact investing, he said, impact investing is like a houseboat. It's not a good house, and it's not a good boat. So we do have those naysayers out there. Fast forward the tape, right? We love Mark. What did he do? He just invested in an impact investing company in this last year. So he's really come around. And this is what we see with a number of different investors. I will say impact investing has a nomenclature problem because there's way too many things that get tucked up under it. And sort of the broad categories, for those of you that aren't really familiar with the space, when we talk about it, we are typically talking about a new class of entrepreneurs coming along who want to build new, exciting businesses that address social challenges. So in addition to a financial return, they are promising a social return in the businesses that they're building. We can talk about what some of those look like if we want to. The second area is social impact bonds. And again, these are all very early days, okay? We've seen some different social impact bonds come along. Even within social impact bonds, there isn't really one definition because they're all looking very different. And if you're in a community here and you're looking at playing a role with social impact bonds, I would guide you to the Arnold Foundation, who has provided resources to teach and train and help people understand, but more importantly, has paid for templates of things like contracts and things that you have to think about because they're expensive to set up in communities. So social impact bonds are another thing, and as philanthropists, a very, very exciting way for us to potentially cover first losses with the idea that we'll unleash additional private capital to address social problems. So that's social impact bonds. And then the third that some people use, we don't believe it really belongs necessarily under impact investing, are the nonprofits that have earned income, revenue streams. So, social impact bonds kind of have their own title, but this impact investing, we tend to think of it as these new companies, but it really is a broader term, and it's really kind of confusing for the marketplace. So I've been working with a coalition for quite some time. I know you had Darren Walker here. Darren's part of it, to basically see if we can make some progress on new definitions and clarities for investors.
That would be helpful, I think, for a lot of us. Going back to the Be Fearless, do you have to be fearless to be an impact investor, or can you be a more conservative investor and channel your resources into this area?
Yeah, well, I like to say I'm not fearless. Like, for me to be fearless is like working out. I am, I'm using the muscles, I'm in training, okay? And for many people, that's kind of what it's going to take to break out and to begin to take even small risks. I don't think that you have to be fearless to get into impact investing. It is an underbuilt ecosystem right now, so the things that you might rely on as an investor aren't necessarily there yet to give you comfort, right? There aren't rating systems. There isn't really like a place where you can go find stocks that you can invest in and impact investing, et cetera. But a group of us, a strong coalition that really came together out of the work that the G8 asked us to do in impact investing, are really working feverishly to build out the ecosystem. But I will tell you, there's a foundation in San Francisco, the Kleisner Foundation, and they have committed to be 100% impact in their corpus, as we have a few other foundations that have as well. They're about 95% of the way down the road, right, because they waited till they saw the best investable deals. And they have made public and transparent all of their returns. And in 4 asset classes, their impact investments have met or beat benchmark. And I am seeing this across the board. In our investment company that my husband runs, Revolution, we put $30 million into a company, Revolution Foods, up in Oakland. Revolution Foods is providing kid-friendly, chef-inspired, healthy meals in our public schools, and they're delivering over $1 million a week right now. That company won that investment not because it was an impact investment, but because it's a great company with real results, real serious leaders, and we believe, ultimately, it's going to be a great company in our portfolio. We think it already is now. But Warby Parker, another example, just a style leader in eyeglasses, but really the mission of that company is twofold. It is absolutely to return a very nice return to their shareholders, but also bring a social benefit as they're making eyewear available to the developing world where it's not available. So, and Warby Parker, Fast Company, named them the #1 innovative company of 2015. They didn't get that because they're an impact company. They got that because they're a great innovative company. If you saw, Etsy went public last week, and I think that, or 2 weeks ago now, probably, maybe more. That's really important. They're a B Corp, right? And they're only the 2nd B Corp, which is sort of what most would consider the gold standard of an impact investing company. Going through that exit, they had a little bit of a frothy IPO. We'll see if it, what happens. But the bottom line is there were investors out there ready to embrace and really putting quite a significant value on the company. So we're seeing things form, right? We're seeing the ecosystem get a little bit more built out with these new companies that are demonstrating they're great in their own right. They're not just great under a category of impact investing. And then we're seeing exits for investors, which has been another concern that we hear time and time again is, sure, I get in, but can I really get out and make some money in this?
We have a lot of leaders of foundations in here, and foundations have a lot of regulation.
Right.
There's also quite a few people here from financial institutions and another set of regulations. But yet, so much of what you've been talking about, and you referenced B Corps and other aspects, is public policy a hindrance, or is it paving the way?
It is right now, I think, a barrier. So I mentioned the work with the G8. So the G8, a few years ago at the summit, put together an impact investing track and asked each country to make policy recommendations to basically unleash impact investing opportunities. So I sat on the US advisory board that did that. We issued our report last June at the White House, and on the day that we did that, we also announced $2 billion in new impact investing commitments. But yes, we need policy. But we've really gone to school on what came before. And if you go to school on venture capital, which today, I'm guessing as I'm looking at, especially if you're in the investing world, you all have some venture investments as part of your portfolio. But you know what? Rewind the tape about 40 years and that wasn't the case, okay, 50 years. It looked a lot like impact investing looks now. And there's a great documentary called Something Ventured that tells the story of the early days. And as a team, we all watched it together at the Case Foundation. And we just, I think our jaws were down. It's like, oh my gosh, this is just what we're experiencing now in impact investing. But policy is a problem. For instance, with pension funds right now, they really, as fiduciaries, can't do anything other than think about the financial return. But at the end of the day, what they really have is a class of people they're trying to support. So ERISA is the federal legislation that sort of defines what pension funds can do. When ERISA said pension funds could invest in venture capital, a hockey stick, almost overnight. It was down here before ERISA, it was here after the ERISA change. So those kind of changes I think will come along that will be policy sort of friendly, but actually way beyond friendly into sort of catalysts to bring more investment to the table.
Is there work that we can do collectively to help that? Is this an issue that our legislators need to be educated on?
Yes, and we spend a lot of time actually, but there's such good news. Our experience with legislators is the same experience we've had in the more than 300 dialogues we've done on impact investing with both audiences like this, one-on-ones, small rooms, et cetera. And that is people come with a fair amount of fear, a fair amount of concern, and in some cases cynical. But as you sit and you work with them and you sort of explain some of the, what we're seeing out there in the field and what's real and what's not necessarily, we see them move. So John Delaney is a longtime dear friend, but he's also a member of Congress. And so because he's a friend, I talked to John and said, John, can we just come talk to you about impact investing? And he's like, yeah, I don't really know what that is. Well, he today is probably our biggest champion on Capitol Hill now. He has a bill before Congress around social impact bonds that's bipartisan, has over 50 members supporting it from both sides. So I think we are starting to see some movement. And what this room can do, of course, is any opportunity you have where you're talking to someone, whether it's local, state, national, to be asking them, are we really clearing the decks to allow this, what I call unleashing private capital to come into the business of addressing social problems? So when you think about it, what I've always said about impact investing is, I think when we're addressing social challenges, I imagine a crew team, because we live on the Potomac in DC, and a crew team rowing, rowing, rowing. But the problem is, as we're addressing social challenges, a lot of those seats have been empty. And particularly, we haven't invited the entrepreneurs into the business of solving social challenges. So it doesn't mean they're going to unseat philanthropy. It doesn't mean they're going to degrade the role of nonprofits. It means they're going to be additive. And of course, if you had a crew team and you had all the seats and they're all rowing in the same direction, you know you're going to go faster and farther than the boat next to you that's missing seats. And so at its simplest form, that's what impact investing is. I should say the other thing we often say is 3 conditions are necessary. And this is, what we try to point out where there is confusion around what are we really talking about here. We say a company must have intention, very clear intention about the social impact that they're in the business to drive. They must commit to measure the social impact. And thirdly, they have to be transparent with both of those so that their stakeholders know and they know this is the game we're in. Okay, it's not really a game, but this is the business that we're in together. And I think when those 3 conditions are there, we generally would consider that an impact organization.
Can you give an example of an organization you've invested in that do
right?
all
So
3
Revolution
of those check
Foods,
off?
Revolution Foods is a great example. Their stated impact is the number of healthy meals that they will deliver. Now you could say that's not impact because we don't really know when you have a kid eat a healthy meal, are there better outcomes? But in that, their stakeholders and their investors say, it's good enough for us if you have delivering the number of meals as what you're measuring, because we do believe there's enough science and data to tell us that that is a good thing for our young people. So Revolution Foods is probably great. I mentioned Warby Parker. Gosh, we work with B Labs, which are these sort of, as I said, gold standards, and we just announced something a few weeks ago, a new campaign they're running called Measure What Matters. And there are so many companies getting engaged in this space. Today there's about 1,500 B Corps, and you can go to the B Corp site and look at who they are and what they look like and what they're committed to do in the 3 ranks. But the really exciting thing is there's 15,000 companies that aren't B Corps that are using their tools, which really indicates to us, right, there's a much bigger desire and sort of passion around this space than we've seen. And so the Measure What Matters basically calls companies to use their tools, even if they don't want to be certified as a B Corp. And, for some investors, that's good enough. You don't have to be a B Corp for me to consider you impact investing. In fact, my husband and I have very different definitions of what we consider impact, and, that's okay.
Well, and that brings me to my next question, because you have the Case Foundation and you have Revolution. And I think the way you do your budgeting at your foundation is really revolutionary. I mean, you start zero base every year, and frankly, it's even beyond the foundation on how you work holistically. How do you make those financial decisions of what's going into the foundation, what's going to go into Revolution, and where are those blends?
So we really start with where are we trying to go? Right? What's the end game here that we're trying to achieve? And we just feel like if you start with what do we use philanthropy for, you're under-leveraged. And I must say to anyone sitting in this room, I know enough about you already to say you're a person of privilege and influence. And if you're just thinking as philanthropy is the way you're going to make a difference, you are under-leveraged. Because the bottom line is using your active networks to engage others, using your private investment to put private investment into some of these companies, bonds, funds, whatever it might be that's right for you. And then, if you have a business, how can your business play a role? And last, we talked about policy. But if you're not thinking about policy as part of what helps you get ahead, again, I think you're under-leveraged. So for us, we don't really start with what's the foundation going to do. It's what's the big idea. And then how do we use all the arrows in our quiver to basically get there? So in almost anything we've taken on, we have a private investment, we have a philanthropic investment, we've engaged the public sector in some way. So it's a cross-sector collaboration to try to get to a finish line.
And you've referenced democracy a couple of times, and lately you've been talking about the democratization of philanthropy.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So, you know, I told you about how I was raised, and so when I called my mom and said, so Mom, you know, I'm actually going to step out of my business career. We're going to create this family foundation, and I'm going to run it full time. So I'm going to be a full-time philanthropist. And she said, what's that? She didn't know. And the bottom line is, we might be able to travel a few miles out from here and find a lot of folks that actually don't know what philanthropy is, right? Mm-hmm. But philanthropy really is just love of humanity. And so I think, you know, as we think about democratizing philanthropy, it really shouldn't be rich people, influential people writing big checks. Everyone can be a philanthropist because everyone can have a love of humanity. And how that plays out could be in volunteerism. It could be in an action. It could be in writing a check, small or large. But in this space, we really wanted to, as social media came onto the scene, we thought it was a terrific opportunity to really see if we could do some democratization and get sort of micro-donations playing a role. So we did a number of experiments, and we committed going in that we would publish all the findings. And that was important. And if you're thinking about sort of how you can be a change maker, I think committing yourselves to publishing your results before you enter something is really important, because trust me, when things start to go wrong, you go, oh, maybe we won't talk about that. So we had made a commitment that we would publish it. So we had invested in 3 online giving platforms, and it was a hybrid kind of different investments in each one. And we spent about $4 or $5 million on these giving platforms. Well, today we take them for granted, but they really didn't exist 15 years ago. To date, those giving platforms have yielded almost $2 billion of contributions in micro-donations. These are citizens across the land giving $10 to something that they care about, $20 to something that they care about. So we did a lot of early social media experiments, and then we published that. And we've just been really thrilled to see how that's picked up and gone forward. And I talked to someone in the room earlier, and she was telling me about a giving circle out here and the giving circle strategy. Another brilliant way to democratize philanthropy, right? The power of small gifts when taken together, really quite extraordinary. And in the giving circles that I heard about, you know, they can make $1 million donation, but the person might write a $500 check. And I think sometimes the unfinished work is when you take, say, a lesser donation, which 500 is big, but let's say 10 or 20, too often the work isn't done to report back and say, Jeff, that $20 you gave us, do you know we were able to deliver water in 3 countries, right? Because, you know, the power of that, of your leveraged investment, is really behind democratization of philanthropy. And so that's mostly what that work's about.
Well, and you mentioned volunteering in that example, and that's how we first met.
That's how we came together,
15 plus years ago, working around volunteering. But unlike so many organizations, you have devoted time, energy, resources to propping up philanthropy, volunteering, civic engagement. What's behind that?
Well, you know, I think it's just an opportunity to move the needle in a big way, right? I mean, think about it. If you had a company and you could engage the masses, you'd say, that's brilliant, right? That's what really, I mean, that's the simple idea behind this. And I think, you know, I had the great benefit of chairing the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation. It was an appointed role under President Bush and brought together 25 leading lights really from around the nation that I had the privilege of working with. And out of that, we went to the nonprofit sector and we said, look, we don't want to just talk about volunteerism, sort of, you know, just nice to do. What is it you really need? And how could we change your trajectory of scale or sustainability? And they said, look, we just need some areas of talent that we don't have and we can't compete with the private sector. marketing, business planning, recruiting, technology. You could probably guess what those are if you work with nonprofit organizations that are often under-resourced. So we said, okay, got it. Came together, we said, where does that exist? Corporate sector. So we turned to the corporate sector and said, all right, how about this? We're asking for $1 billion in commitments of pro bono time out of those areas of talent deployed out to nonprofits across communities, across sectors. And let me tell you when we launched that, late 2008. And the night before, everybody said, you can't launch this. We're in a financial crisis. Companies just aren't going to do it. So anyway, long story short, we did launch it. It was definitely affected by the financial crisis, but in some ways that actually turned out to be a benefit, as companies needed sort of to not lay off their employees, but basically give them something to do until they could come back. Today, it's over $5 billion in commitments and nearly 1,000 companies. So, you know, these big ideas, and this was not us, this was a collaboration, but these big ideas of moving the needle, you know, too often people of influence or resources feel that death by 1,000 cuts, right? You're getting a call every day to do something. The nice thing about these big ideas that can coalesce people, you know, really brings us together, and it's a lighter lift for all of us if we're pulling together.
And I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to go to your questions. So if any of you you've filled out your cards, raise your hands. Farrah's right there, and she can pick them up. So you and I are baby boomers, but you're spending a lot of time on millennials these days, and we're hearing a lot about millennials, and you've been supportive of an annual report that I find fascinating. In fact, I'm looking forward to the next initiative coming out, I think, in June.
In June,
the Millennial Impact Report.
Right.
So talk about your work with millennials and really what you see as their impact on philanthropy and change making going forward.
Sure. Well, I'm, you know, an unabashed, huge fan of this generation. I actually believe they will be the next greatest generation. And I work with literally thousands around the nation, and we host this conference called MCon. It's the largest gathering of millennials that takes place every year. It's in Chicago on June 24th and 25th. And I would invite anyone here and or your colleagues to come and be a part of it, and I think you'll get a better sense than what I can tell you from here. But, you know, all young people have idealism. I think what I see that's very different in this generation is they are actioning their idealism. And we're trying to be helpful in that way, right, to give them roadmaps and pathways to jump on, if you will, to move them from what I believe is really great intention into action. So when you see a millennial, you know, texting or looking at his or her phone, you think, what's wrong with you, you know, can't you? Well, 80% of them are using their cell phones to connect with nonprofit organizations. We put out data all the time that says, you know, what you see from afar versus what's really happening with this generation is very different. They're getting deeply engaged in the work of changing the world. Many of them, and I was talking to the dean earlier, and we were comparing notes, you know, many of them just aren't satisfied with the idea of just a job. They really do want to feel at the end of the day that they're playing a role in changing the world, and they're willing to do the hard work to do it. And so that's behind it, and the data behind it really, the report we do every year is to inform organizations across all sectors who want to understand the generation better, figure out how to work with them, figure out, you know, what do they want so that our organizations can address their needs and opportunities as well. We just love that work.
And the first question from the audience, I think, is the perfect follow-up to what you just said. Do you have any advice for nonprofits struggling with their budgets who might not have the extra resources necessary to connect to millennials through technology? What should those organizations do?
Yeah, you have to find the resources to connect with those millennials through technology. It should be job one. If you're a brand, you know that people in the age range of what millennials are today, I mean, advertising dollars, advertising agencies, that's their number one priority. If you're a nonprofit and you have to have a bright future, you have to be addressing and meeting where they are, this next generation. They will lift you. They will make your work more exciting. They will find new pathways for you that you might not have been thinking about how to address challenges. So I don't know your board situation, but hopefully your board's having a conversation around what really matters. And I don't know an organization that would say this next generation, which is the future, and by the way, it's not 10 years out the future, it's now the future, okay? Reaching them where they are should be job number one.
The next question, I think, builds on what Ken had mentioned, and that's the work of the Center around place-based initiatives within communities. In your experience, what role does philanthropy have in shaping strong communities, and what extent does individual leadership play a role in transforming those communities?
Yeah, well, I really meant what I said with all sincerity when I came on the stage and said, I've been so impressed to meet people here. It's quite clear that you guys have a really strong, heartfelt passion as leaders to address the needs of your community here, and it's really impressive to see. Philanthropy can play a very exciting role, a catalytic role. So we use our philanthropic investments to basically demonstrate, as I said, sometimes do experiments, et cetera, with the hope, and actually our teams create business plans for what we're going to do. They compete with each other for, how this sort of zero-based budget is going to happen. But as part of that, when we review where we've been at the end of the year, we say how leveraged were our programs. And, the idea there really was, were we able to use our influence and our money in a catalytic way so that we brought others to the table, and now there are many more sort of pushing forward. And I think that role of philanthropy is really important. But I also must say, we've always said there's no amount of philanthropy that can make up for jobs that are missing. And so, I think it's so important to pay attention to the economic health of the community that you're in, because without basic access to jobs, philanthropy is trying to hold up the ship, right? But the ship is sinking. So I think sometimes philanthropy doesn't see itself as in the role of building jobs, but I think the first social compact is a job. And if you have a good, pathway to jobs in your community, you can then use your philanthropy to do so many other meaningful things to improve lives.
Absolutely. Okay, this one I would almost turn backwards because I'm the one that needs help with technology, not the youth. But can we better use technology to increase giving and engage the next generation of philanthropists?
I absolutely think we can. And as I mentioned before, we've worked on a number of different, so because we're cross-sector, we work with brands all the time to try to drive this. So we've done Twitter campaigns, again, in some cases just more as the trainer, if you will, of the brands that are face forward. Twitter campaigns, mobile, different techniques that we've done. We've done text messaging campaigns to raise money, et cetera. And the amount of dollars and support coming through these technology attempts, it's really, really quite impressive. So I do think technology can be huge no matter the organization you're in. And in the same way I said you have to really, be reaching millennials where you are, the world has really changed. What are we doing? We're holding this thing all day long. So make sure you have a smart strategy for how you're present on this thing. That's what I'd say.
Okay. And that just leads into, what is the foundation doing to engage young people in philanthropy?
Yeah, it's a big part of our work. And again, we publish every year sort of the MCON work, the MCON data, we do the conference, et cetera, but it really is an all-year thing that we do. I personally spend time mentoring. I probably have between a dozen and 18, mostly young women, that I'm trying to mentor who are millennials, and I get more out of that than they do. And I'm really thinking about it right now because I have about 10 that are getting ready to graduate and don't yet know where they're going. And so, I want to put a plug in for mentoring because in some ways, because I'm the beneficiary of that, you might imagine I'm a big champion of it. But because I actively do it, I just find that it's really, really great stuff. It's fun. I feel more rewarded than the mentees that I spend time with. And if, I often on social media just put out a note that says, so who are you mentoring? Someone needs you today. And if you're not mentoring, and we tend to think of mentoring as, I don't have an hour a week, or it doesn't have to be like that. It really could be just one conversation with a young person and then some touch-base time so that they know there's someone that they could go to get a perspective. For me, it was so invaluable. I know I would not be sitting here able to do the things I'm doing today, but one person said, I've got her under my wing.
Would you do this in the middle of the night? I mean, you have such a full plate of, I'm mentoring 10, 12, 16 girls.
Well, sometimes I take them all to dinner.
Oh, collectively.
So, sometimes I do that. Email's pretty efficient. Text messaging's pretty efficient. I'm very excited. We have an MBA that's graduating from Georgetown in a few weeks, and she just got her dream job. And I was able to work with the CEO to say, there's an extraordinary young woman I just want you to open your mind to. And that's, she's off now, okay? Return on investment, I don't think you'll find anything you can do in your life that will equal mentoring.
Agree. So someone wants to know, what was the name of that eyeglass company and where can they buy them?
I have the great privilege of knowing the founders. It's Warby Parker. And I'd say if you want to, first of all, they're the hippest, coolest. In fact, at USC, I bet if we had some students here, they'd be wearing Warby Parker glasses. The cool thing about Neil Blumenthal, their founder, I often put him on stages like this, and I've done fireside chats with him, is that he makes the point they're a social enterprise. As I said, their mission is really to build a terrific company so that they have a sustainable path to fund delivering eyewear to the developing world. But Neil always says, look, mission's really important, but if we're not doing our central business first, which is being a hot brand that everybody wants, then we won't be successful with our mission. So what I love about the message that Neil brings, and it's often misunderstood with social enterprises, is you have to be great at your core business first, right? And when you are, that enables all kinds of ways for you to take your mission forward. But if you start with the mission and you don't have a compelling product, it's much harder to reach scale and sustainability in the mission. But their glasses are cool. I own them. I try to wear them sometimes when I go onto campuses. But check them out. They're online, and you can order them.
Good sales pitch. And then one last question. Where do you see philanthropy going?
Oh, I'm so excited about philanthropy. But what I'm really excited about is maybe something we can't even name as we sit here this morning. I mean, the world is disrupted. No matter what role you're in, no matter what sector you come from, right? Nothing's the same as it was. And we know change is only going to continue to accelerate. So, I think that there is a way you can go forward in trying to change the world in which, you drive down in philanthropy, or maybe you want to be public sector, and that's. But what I love about hanging out with, young kids is they're unleashed from those silos and that baggage. They see a world in which it's not really about, are you government, are you nonprofit, are you philanthropy, are you, academia, whatever. They just want to go change the world. And so what I think is, if we look around the corner, I think we might see whole new classes of almost governance, if you will, of corporate form, okay? Maybe not necessarily nonprofit, maybe not necessarily for-profit, maybe hybrids. That's what some of the social enterprises are. And I just think, we need to always unleash ourselves from how it's been and think about what it needs to be going forward. And I'm super encouraged. I was super encouraged talking to all of you this morning and seeing the great stuff that you're doing and the way you're thinking out there. And I can't wait for the future.
Yeah. So we're ending on a high note. We have hope for the future. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.